Because we were true to this all the way up until this point, and we pursued this knowledge even until right now, before we go into 2025, the actual code to this matrix was revealed. See, I did start realizing that for me, sometimes even watching, too much, even YouTube or other people's ideas and things like that do get a bit harmful. This is why I have a tendency not to just be trolling the chats. Yo, everybody, it's me again. Here's what I know. You know what I mean? And just let it flow, because I find that there's this perfect pattern when we rely on gnosis. You see what I mean? So remember, all these things that are given are catalysts to your own gnosis, right? And when you think about them, like I've had times where I was only able to read a page. I am so what they would call busy right now, just means every moment of my time is filled with something. When I want to even do something that seems like, I always thought of reading as leisurely. Now it's like mandatory. So I just be in there just trying to get one last thing in before either something happens or I'm about to fall asleep, and I may only get one page. And I realize in many of those times, I was just told, just think about that one page rather than continuing to go through the book and keep reading more and more. Just think about this one page. And this was very important for these funds and works that I'm going to show you today. And I'm going to continue to go forward. We're coming into, again, 2025. I'm in an industry that you only get recognized when you fail at times. Think about what I'm saying. It's like folks be blowing up when they have a conspiracy going on, but when they're just doing what they said they were going to do consistently, crickets, everybody's looking for the drama, right? But this is also, this is how it would work anyway, right? Like you wouldn't have like everybody there all at once when it's time for that nectar to start pouring onto the palates, okay? So I'm doing this, I'm going in the ambassador tribe inside of Discord, and I'm putting in this book, the Mystic Test book, okay? To corroborate a nice chunk of what I'm gonna be presenting today. But also, as you know, we have been on this. Anybody who's been just following along, like it's been 3 years of us consistently going through certain things, like check, that's how it is, right? Check, yeah, okay, check. All right, let's go to the next thing. And then getting to a point where we're even moving in a whole year. Like, let's say last year was a whole year of just a complete anu, as they would say, a complete rotation around, as from our Earth around the sun, or around this knowledge, this ego, and all the things that the sun stands for. And so we did that consistently, and the wheel is turned, the wheel is rolling. And it is good. And what I mean by that is that it's actually producing something that I can say, I didn't actually necessarily think of it that way, but that does make sense. So meaning that you're actually benefiting even from the ideas that are not necessarily written anywhere, you heard before, they fit perfect, i.e. gnosis, right? So let's continue with this gnosis and continue to identify these patterns and realize where these grooves are, right? So we can really, really make some music. Before that, though, of course, I have to really state for the moment in time that, wow, we're here, and we are here unified. These outstretched hands are that sign of wholeness. It's the universal symbol that I won. That's the number one, I win, which is what moves, right? What moves the whole matrix in itself. So this is that universal symbol, and we celebrate this because we know that we're here in a tutelage. This is like an EverQuest. It's a journey that goes on for infinity unless you want to die. And there's no such thing as death, so this could get very strange really fast. And that's what people have gotten themselves into. So just realize, though, that you put yourself in a condition that no matter where you are on the journey, you're still comfortable. Maybe not as comfortable as you would like to be in your space, but you're good. Your lowest low is still most highest high, okay? I'm gonna explain that. So See, these days, they're so synchronistic. You know, you see how we hit Friday the 13th. I had no clue it's Friday the 13th. Remember, I'm just Boy Meets World most of the time until some real dialing happens. That way I'm not putting my hands and fingers on things, right? So I happened to arrive, and this is just how it happens. Long story short, you know, we were going into the city, and generally we just, you know, stay at a hotel, whatever, just stay at a hotel. This time we decided, hey, maybe we'll try this Airbnb thing, right? We saw some pictures, and the pictures was looking okay. So we arrived. And things were okay, but not necessarily, I'd rather be at the hotel. Let's just put it that way. But the house was called, or was on the number 13, and it was called the Black House, right? So, of course, you know, I'm just trying to get over the night, right, and have a good night's sleep. Needless to say, I didn't see really much happen, but I was definitely dialing into the synchronicities once the next day I found out that it was Friday the 13th. And I was like, oh, okay, I get it. So this dial in of what I'm talking about, this synchronizing with the universe and the magnetism that comes across it is simply being in the parade, being in the celebration, being in the retinue, being in that process of procession and standing in on whatever character that you happen to be landing on to continue to represent this solidity, which is basically having a space where things that are still growing can actually go through that nourishment process, which is an extremely low vibration in the grand scheme of things, but necessary, as all is necessary, and also all is self. So here we go today. I definitely wanted to celebrate just this moment of clarity and being in tune. And also I want to celebrate that with you because these moments are actually moments that you can visit at any point, any space, any time. And this is not the only one. Wholeness. Okay, so as you can see, the wisdom is working, so we want to continue the wheel. Let's first begin just with an insight. And this insight, let me see where everybody is. I've been flying blind over here. There you are. Okay, you're over here. Let's put you over here now. Okay, this insight is that of a fish, okay? So I heard this. I put my own sauce on it. I'm just going to bring it back to you. So imagine the condition of a small fish. This small fish could be confined to a specific part of the ocean. And while that small fish can stare a little bit into the abyss but can't see very far, that fish knows that it is confined to that domain. And so is many things in this creation on this planet were created with that same level of confinement. They were actually given faculties that extend or limit the regions that they're in. This is the story of a fish. Now let us look at humanity, the human, man, woman, who in many ways has this ability to transcend the limitations, actually become, you know, really anything. That's the truth, anything. But at least one can train themselves to weather a variety of environments. One can use their wits and their intelligence and even create and build things that will allow them to explore spaces that few have seen, at least few that are encased inside of this and are not using it for what it truly can do. Think of even simply things to train and tune your body with: balance, martial arts, resilience, holding the breath, withstanding cold. All these things, the body can be tuned to actually ride peak in those areas. So just always remember that with what I'm going to explain to you today, because it lets you know that we can assume any position. In fact, the reason why so many have so many titles, whether it's their names, their occupation: I'm a dentist, I'm a doctor, I'm a janitor, I'm a teacher, I'm James. But all the numerous titles: I'm a vegan, I practice the keto or keto. So the reality is that we have all these different names, all these different titles. Could that be because we're in a role-playing game? Do the characters themselves initiate the game? Okay, because when we say game, you know, we're a countless amount of things that we would call time away from when it began. So the actual definition has changed over time based on how people play it. But what I'm really introducing here is that the root, because the game could even be like, they call, when you go hunting, game, right? Like the food that's accumulated is called game. So game has a very broad definition on the scope of things, but sometimes, especially in this society, we think of PlayStation. But there's only one thing that you should really know about what creates a game, and that is that it has characters, not necessarily what goes on in the game. As long as something has characters, a game has began. And that's the secret really to the universe, because in the unified side, everything has no identity. It's all the same thing. And you couldn't even think about what that's like if you try to do it with this brain, because this brain is already separate. You're instantly locked out of being aware of what exactly that means from a conceptual level inside of physical reality, to be connected, right? Even the thought of it sometimes scares people. They're like, well, I'm going to lose my identity too. But we need to realize for sure that the game begins by associating something with everything that is in the game, and we call that character. So let's go through this process of uncovering the game, but also remember the fish. Now first enters the king. And what I'm getting at here is that, so as the game begins, the king is the card that enters into the game first. And how we learned about this through occultism was actually through this concept of a demiurge, where the mother clearly has more advanced powers, but the son is actually born into a confined world. Okay? So this, what we're engaging in, is investigating patterns first, because what happens is oftentimes when we see king, and this is how the mirror of the world can lie, the illusionary realities can lie. When we say king, we would like refer to the king that is in England or Scotland or something like this. It's a visual that we have of a king sitting on a throne, rather than just the position of the card itself and what it embodies. And in this way, we have a scenario where we have consistently, from the first books that were ever written about just a potential story happening here on Earth, it does start with a king. We look at, in this case, Bao from the Ugarit text. Okay, because as I said, we're going to have to go scholarly now. And by all means, with AI, let's go. Because when they think, okay, yeah, let's go scholarly. Okay, yeah, that's exactly the linchpin to all this. Because if we go real scholarly, we can really set things straight fast. The Ugarit text, which is a stone, hammers out a story. And this story goes in about this king who enters into this battle with chaos. And while the story is continuously told throughout society and changes in different ways, the principles of the story are the same. Generally, the chaos is an uncalm ocean as a symbolic. Like, if you've ever been on the ocean before, and you could imagine, I've been seasick before, so I've been on the ocean when it's a little rough, and I wasn't even in like the deep ocean where they say, oh man, these waves are like, you're hanging on for your life. You're getting slammed around the cabinet. You're sick and beyond sick, and it won't stop. This is the chaos. Nothing can be planted. Nothing is sitting around. Everything is flung all over. You're hanging on for your life. Think about our forefathers and mothers, but mainly the forefathers, getting out there on that water and braving the deep, because it is unpredictable. Even people with the best equipment, we had the best equipment and still ended up in a storm that just seemed to appear out of nowhere. which a lot of stuff does in the ocean. But again, just imagine that first roll. And you're coming in, and now you got to find someplace stable, a foundation. And so in this way, everyone here is a king. Because when you enter into the game first, you enter into chaos. And now you have to find, find. You have to take your foundation. Okay? Like in this world, and that's what I was saying, these are worlds. This is the one that's 365 and a quarter. This is the matrix that we're talking about specifically. This is the game played in this matrix. Of course, there are other matrices. They have different stories, different geometry, different numbers. But they would, if you knew the code there, you would be able to pull the entire matrix apart from the code. And so I'm going to show you the code to this matrix. But I want to start with this story first because it is recorded, right? It goes on also and is told again with even Tiamat and Marduk. In fact, it gets so literal and base at certain times. You even get physical kings on earth battling against women or the divine feminine. You see what I mean? Which is like one of the step downs to the correspondences of chaos. And this is why, as I said before, you have female pumas, you have female lions, you have females in different species. What is it as a principle? And then, as you see with everything in life, if the man is not able to basically bring in a woman and charm a woman and make his way with a woman, then life can't continue, right? So there's this deep hidden symbolism within everything in the matrix. And it actually was a number in many ways. And everything was perfect. And because it was a number also, this meant the number was created from the rotation of the world. Meaning that we could always see, even for ourselves, when we make a complete turn, no matter where we are, what we are, if it's round, if it's flat or whatever, we can time exactly when we make a complete turn. So that is where the numbers initially came from. And so when you enter into this, you can also imagine then that you have to make your way. And it was symbolic to that you needed to find, and this was the lighter context because everybody told the story different, but it still meant the same thing. You needed to find the sweet water, okay? The sweet water. Now, I actually used to live in a place, I think in Texas, and I believe it was also called Sweetwater. It was just a long time ago. But every time I heard it, I used to always think, man, why do they call it Sweetwater? Is like the water like sugary? Right? And so thus I just kind of, and then I even asked somebody, you asked one of them old heads, so why do they call it Sweetwater? They said, yo, my dad, this is an actual story. My dad used to have a well, and when we would drink the water was a little sweet. And so I just kind of rolled it off like that was the meaning until I now need 20, 30 years later to just make sure that that is the real reason they call it that. And of course it's not. It's actually because water is seen as sweet because there's a lot of salt water also on the planet, a lot, and we can't drink it. So in that way, it's chaos to us. We can't even irrigate with it. It kills crops in that way. You need fresh water. And in this way, fresh water was known as the sweet water. Okay? So, and in these texts, which, sometimes need their own reinterpretations in modern times, even in the Epic of Atrahasis, in the beginning, where the whole Anunnaki thing even starts in our reality as far as the story is concerned, it's what they're actually engaged in that I think people should take a look at, which is dredging the river Euphrates and the river Tigris, meaning that they're put to some kind of laborious task to basically run huge aquifers. And I thought that, nah, it's got to be something else. Show me what about the tablet of the knee? But where are the spaceships at? You're thinking of all this grand stuff. But in reality, the thing that they're engaged in that we can absolutely prove is that they're changing the channels of the major rivers in this time of the world, like the original rivers of the world, the four rivers, if you may. They're damming up stuff. And they're building the Apsu, which is, the jury's still out on what exactly that is. There's a lot of notions of it, but it says in there they needed to build the Apsu. And in this, they had to dredge all of this, and they were put to this hard labor. And then they start murmuring and complaining. And this is the Anunnaki saga, right? However, the most important thing I find there is that, well, wait a minute. What are you doing with the water? And what happens if you begin to rechannel water just on a whole earth like it is, like we're on right now? And they've actually found out that 1, you change the shape of it. 2, you throw off the degrees of it. You tilt it, as they're even discovering now that the earth is now tilting even further than what it was. And they're saying, it's because they literally say because we're drinking up all the water. At least they were able to discover it's because, hey, water is being displaced, and this is like creating some movement, right? So prior to this, and this is my theory, that this structure that we're in spent on a 360-degree perfect circle. But after the lopsidedness, whatever, causes that, we have a tilt now. This causes now the 4 seasons. This causes what I believe is what they call continental drift. What they call entire land masses go under the water while others rise up. Let's say the jury's still out on this. But follow me as I go through this process, because we see then that there's a king, and the king is engaged in basically making the land habitable, no matter how you want to take that. You can take that spiritually, like you enter into an astral plane and it's completely hostile and you don't even know where you are, and you need to figure out how to orientate yourself. I can tell you that is exactly the story of Earth. You arrive, you don't even know where people still have not figured out where they are, right? And they're orientating themselves. So these are patterns that we recognize, but we also need to recognize the action. So what do I do next? This becomes the key to the system that I'm talking about, is it always shows you what happens next. And because of that process of prediction, it can make a person the king in that way, as far as riches and power. It is the prediction of the future, but can also make a person other things too, like other cards, other characters also in the game. Okay. So we have, again, let me just read the story. Bel-Hadad, the storm god, defeats Prince Yam, Zebu Yam, and Judge River, personifications of the chaotic and destructive forces of the sea. These entities demand kingship from El, the chief deity, and assert their dominance over the gods. Baal refuses to submit to their rule, armed with magical clubs, the Yagrush chaser and the Ymir driver, forged by Koltherwa Cassis, the divine craftsman. Baal strikes down Yim and secures his supremacy. This victory not only vanquishes chaos, but also establishes Baal's authority among the gods as a storm and fertility deity. Okay, so let's imagine that things are like they used to be. And we're coming into a very powerful tribe as a man. We will find rights that are similar to this man needing to find his place amongst the rest of the men. And the rest of the men saying, yo, he's going to carry my shoes. Because there's degrees in hierarchy, just like your father be like, yo, get my shoes, son. You see what I mean? So there's degrees and there's hierarchy. So when you're coming in and you establishing yourself now, you still have the blood of your fathers, right? But in that moment, you also have your ego, which is symbolic to the sun. And the ego is like always seeing everything new. That's why the sun is like symbolic to new and fresh and young. So it comes in and it has all this ancient assets, these ancient assets, but it's also seen through that singular, but this is who I am. And now it must prove itself amongst all that has been already. And this is like chaos in certain ways because they're very skilled at how all the reality works. However, the test is to see if you can tune into your Gnostic side. If you can, it's to push you to tune into what is already in you, to kind of like move the ego out of the way so that you can understand the difference between your ego or your id versus like your ancestral power that is already coursing through your veins. So then that comes forth as a challenge, okay? And before the challenge, there's instability already because you're trying to find your place. When things don't have their place, they're unstable. That's symbolic on so many levels. So you're trying to find your place or where you fit in your purpose. And then once you find your purpose, as it goes on in these texts, there was a palace built generally. You built your home. Okay, so we'll just read it here. It says the consolidation. Following his triumph, Hadad commissions Khosrow-Khasis to build him a magnificent palace on Mount Zaphon, Sapunu, the cosmic mountain representing divine authority and power. The palace, complete with windows to release his life-giving rains and thunder, signifies Baal's rule as a sustainer of life and provider of fertility for the earth, okay? Let's just put that in real context here. First of all, another character is introduced, which I find is quite interesting. For me, because I've seen the past pattern so many times, I've decided I'll just sit in that pattern, which is either it's Atra-Hasis, Khosrow-Khasis, or Thoth. And then there's a slew of other names that take on this same role. They don't seem to actually be in the game completely, but they aid in talk to and create for beings in the game, okay? Almost like in a way where it's like a muse in a certain way. It shows up to kind of help you like, yo, you'll never defeat Yam and them. Like they really got their shit together. However, if you work the chaser and the driver, you can solidify your position because it will let them respect you, push them back off you and give you your own space for a moment so you can develop. You see what I mean? So these are characters being introduced also in the game, okay? So in this process, again, what we're talking about is the sustaining of life and fertility, okay? So instead of even focusing on this king and trying to create an identity around them, it's easier to just look at it like, okay, I need to survive, because that's the first thing that needs to happen when you arrive, is that we got to survive first. That's why that part of the brain is developed first, survival. You see what I mean? And then all the more complex parts of the brain are developed later, right? So this is the process. Make your place, find your home, get your sweet water, and survive until we call you back for the next stage, okay? So the next stage happens to be, because remember, this first stage is fertility. So basically, create more. Create more of you, replicate. This to me is, the DNA is the highest level of cloning in itself. Not this modern version of cloning they be talking about, but that we can replicate ourselves. Our children have us in them. You can see it. And we could do this multiple times if we have fertility, if we have a space that they can grow. And so remember, that force that comes in first, it has to set that. It's like, yo, give us some space to grow here so I can begin to multiply, and that what I represent can be known and not known, because who cares about somebody else knowing about you? Known to you and your family. You see what I mean? But so that we can continue to thrive, right? This is like somebody came in, it was chaos, and then now we're pushing into this chaos to make more of a space for us to live. Now, I will tell you later on that this is the great battle of life, night and day, chaos and order. Because when there's too much of one, the other suffers. So even when there's too much order, like organizing the land, and now we got houses, now we got, and all this, the land itself, the chaos is suffering. You see what I mean? It can get more violent, if you may, if it doesn't have areas where it can do its chaos, where it's not, where people are trying to stop the chaos, whether it's through weather changing or building dams and canals and all the stuff that we do to prevent the natural wildness of nature. You follow me? And this is why I was saying woman is in that symbolism, because she was the wild in that way, the wild itself. Okay? So now the next thing that has to happen for the king is, in this text, is there's a conflict. In this conflict in Baal's reign, Baal is challenged by Mot. Now, okay, let me slow down for a minute. Why do I go to Baal's story? Because technically, if you're like a Bible thumper, I basically went to what could be considered as the enemy of Yahweh, which is the God of the Bible. And then now I could be kind of flagged as being like, yo, he was like Baal worshiper or whatever. And then, of course, we're with Yahweh. And they would be so uneducated. Because as I said, this is the text that the Bible was written from. Later on, there was another king trying to dispose another king, and so just made him like an enemy of the king that was originally in the book. However, this is very specific here that we need to understand that this story, which even goes into a process where Baal ends up in the netherworld and there's desolation in the land, and then his mother has to come get him. It's the same story of Jesus. It's the same story of Tammuz and Dammuz. It's the same story all throughout the culture, but this is the oldest recorded one in that respect, right? They're one, meaning the one they have access to. There are ones that are way more descriptive and way more, let's say, precise at other things that happen. But those are things like you will find written in the scrolls of the Tibetans somewhere in a language that you can't read, right? Or in still pots in India where some of the scribes and scholars and rishis, et cetera, wrote about these kind of things, right? It's not like readily available on Amazon. So this one, though, the Ugarit text recounts a story of Baal, and he's older and predates the Bible. And there's so much similar to Baal and to Jesus, you catch right off that Baal is Jesus. And Baal is Yahweh. And actually something really crazy is going on in the Bible, because there's a new story being told, apparently because a new king has come, right? And that's why they call it a New Testament, new testicles, new fertility, new family line, new bloodline. You see what I mean? That's what all that means. But before all of that happened, which is the most important part because it's the actual story, we see what happens next. Baal's reign is challenged by Mot, death. Right? So there's something worse than Baal. So even if they wanted to make Baal the bad guy, even though we've already isolated that this is the Baal's area of the body in itself, there's someone worse, death, which actually sits a little bit further down there, right? And death is a god of sterility, right? And the underworld in this way, right? So this is like the nether region itself. This is like in a sliding scale where there's just continuous orgasm over here. Over here, there's sterility. There is no life. It's a barren wasteland in that way, right? So they're just giving you an idea of the extremes. A lot of times people get into looking at these characters and trying to figure out who is them. You see what I mean? Like, rather than realizing that, hey, these are all characters in the game that we constantly oscillate through, even when we go eat something that's new and then finally ends up in the toilet. You see what I mean? So in this way, Mot is displeased with Baal's kingship, and he summons him to the underworld, a barren and a lifeless domain. Reluctantly, Baal descends, and his absence brings drought and disorder to the cosmos. The earth becomes desolate, and the natural cycles of the life are disrupted. So, again, this is just recording that, hey, that is the same thing as Jesus being in hell for 3 days. And then coming and then rising from that, because then it goes with the demise and the resurrection. In the underworld, Baal is swallowed by Mot, symbolizing his death. Now, where does all this come from? Well, look, we get older. So as a king, the only thing that is really, really a problem still is time, death, sterility, losing the ability to fecundate, losing the ability to create. You see what I mean? So this is why it's said as an opponent. And then it's like, oh, then he's brought to that world. This is like symbolic to you go to the underworld after you die, if you may, right? And then now you got to figure out who you truly are in order for you to live again. You see what I mean? You got to come to the terms that there's no such thing as death. And this is actually an idea of the mind. But this is complex things because you would have to realize that you were in the game. You would have to realize a lot of other components before this happened. And this is why the king has been around the circle 4 times, according to the cards, each time changing his shape. First coming in as a king of hearts, then a king of diamonds, then a king of spades, then a king of clubs. And we'll explain later on kind of how that is the metamorphosis of the character. Another example of this is like the jacks, or what they call the knaves. They say were once good men, meaning that this is symbolic to if you're in the matrix as a knight and you start taking bribes and you start becoming a tyrant, you eventually become a knave. You will still hold your same position, but you will be completely corrupted and you will move to like a blacker or darker card. You see what I mean? So there's a code here, but I got to desist because it's like, okay, you got to give me a little more of that before I understand how that works. But what I'm coming into is revealing that there was a book that was written, and that book was not given to this world. That book was sealed up until a time. That time is now. So, you know, that kind of is a precursor to exactly what is revealed with this knowledge that's in this book. It's also a disclaimer. It's a disclaimer that so people asked for occultism. They asked for metaphysics. They asked for the mysteries. They asked for the secrets. You see what I mean? So in many ways, like, I just have to say it like it is. These type of matters are not for the faint and the weak. That's why they don't have it. Also, if I came in here just reciting everything that I heard from somebody else, we wouldn't be at it because nobody has seemed to crack this. It's a timing thing, a pattern thing, a ordination thing, a character thing, a magnetism thing. Everything's got to line up. But when it does, you actually see why it lined up for you in your life at that time. You see what I mean? So it just happens to be our time is what I'm saying. This knowledge will make it to every soul at some stage when they're inside of the game. Okay? So we go forward because, again, we see this king story. We'll digress from it. But you see the story is in the ancient text. And it is told through different cultures. Again, there's a remake of it, Tiamat and Marduk. There's many of these stories of the first man needing to settle ground, if you may. Okay? So now we're going to really go into something different, right? Because, you know, it was like one of those movies where it starts with the end. You know, y'all like those movies. It starts with the end, but, you know, then it kind of tells you, all right, well, you know, 20 years earlier. Okay, so we'll start that way now, or we'll continue. So how this began was in our last session, as we were decoding words, mainly, well, we had some specific codes in that case. It was GBR, okay, Great Britain. Right? No. Gibberish, the gibberim, Gabriel. I mean, there were so many words that were powerful, Gibraltar, that we were able to sink into this GBR in order to show how the code of the matrix will expunge the truth, even if people don't want to say it or it's not written. Remember what I'm saying to you, because this code corrects errors. They have a story of a master magus using this code to correct astronomers' assumptions about the orbits and revolutions of Jupiter. Meaning that this master code is capable of analyzing many things. I've barely scratched the surface, even with what I'm going to introduce today. In fact, I'm introducing just how you comprehend it, like how you remove the doubt from your mind that something is actually going on here. We begin with the universal language, which is numbers. Okay, numbers in countless scenarios has proven to be the universal language. So I would ask simply the question, where do the numbers come from? When is the first time we started using them, especially in any kind of format like we see today? Because look at the symbols that we're using for the number. We're using these symbols. Where did those come from? So it comes out that the beginning, first of all, the numerical stuff. And this is the oldest records here on the earth. So they can go to Wikipedia, they can go to OpenAI, they can go to 01, and let 01 tell them. It'll tell you that India produced a numerical system in the Devanagari. And this was seen as like the beginning of numbers because they also introduced the 0, which is like a quantum leap for anybody trying to work with numbers. And so in that way, I have to connect this awareness, which we've been talking about, in relation to the Naga. Because now we're going to go thousands and thousands of years after the Naga, which so many have, so disrespectful to the Naga. Here's all I have to say about it. The way in which in the world we at times ignore our elders and we don't take care of them like we used to, and we know it's going to spell bad news for all of us. Like we got to at least implement this in our households, the respect of our elders. But the world's way of treating its elders and those that came before them is disrespectful. And we can't imagine that things are going to go well like that, right? Because the main name of this book also that really, really rings true is the solar book of natural order. And what this simply means is that, hey, you're going to be playing a game of scales. You want to really do your best to stay in natural order as much as possible. Now, people are going to go into different orders, if you may. They're going to be different, unique, etc. But the natural order you need to know, though, because it's the one that when you're looking for guaranteed results, you're going to use that. If you don't want to get results, or if you want to be wrong, then you don't use the natural order, okay? That just even sounds crazy to not use it, but trust me, as a species, we often choose not to use the natural order with how we go at certain things. Sometimes we deviate from that natural order. So I'm not here to judge any of that today, actually, period. What I'm here is to give the lexicon, the guide, the legend to the path. So even if you're off the path, you kind of know how to get back on if you want to, or how to, because the path is like a journey. So how to lean more to the left than to the right if you need to do that. It's like a course, how to kind of start getting the boat at least going in the direction, even if you're pulling an arc, like you're not going directly back to the center. You may be like, okay, at this course, I'm going to gradually get back to the center. And that just means doing things that are more related to the natural order and less things more to the things that the natural order actually shows you does not work out well. And one of those is disrespecting the elders. And it's for obvious reasons, because the elders are holding that time, that period of time of their experience, real raw experience. And they are to pass that knowledge to the younger so that they can start where they left off, because that's the whole continuation and the whole reason of the process of the cloning of the DNA. Because the DNA doesn't exist in time, every time someone else comes here and actually does something further in the direction of things that are obscure, things that are unknown, it writes it further and deeper inside of the Akashic that we all share inside of our DNA. So this is why it's so important in many ways for that respect to be there. But, and it's a big but, there's some disrespectful beings on the planet that don't seem to realize, hey, if you don't give the credit to how it all began, and you instead put yourself there, like you are the one that created and done things, you throw us all out of order, okay? And then it takes what I have to do today, where someone must reproduce then the code, because the code will tell us what is the next sequence, and then basically put the whole structure back together again. This already happened also. This is something I'm revealing to you today, but it exists even within the modern playing cards. So the system is there, but people don't know how to read the system, okay? So let's go forward with just realizing that, as I said, those serpent-headed ones or dark-headed ones or black-headed ones that came forth by day from the center of the earth, not a landmass like Lemuria, which was named after them trying to figure out why the lemurs were on the other side of the world, but actually in the deep aquatic darkness. The beings that came forth through that, as they say, in the netherworld and in the underworld, there's characteristics of the netherworld and the other world. Riches, like diamonds, gems, because you find all of the gold and all the crystals and stuff deep in the earth. Also, knowledge and danger. But remember, many have traversed the deep, including any so-called Mashiach, has traversed the deep in order to get the wisdom, meaning you have to die in order to know the complete truth, which is that you can't die. You see, it's not something that somebody can actually tell you, though. It's something that you got to experience. So let's keep going forward. So at some stage, the Naga introduced quite a few things. And this is why we start seeing the geometry very heavy. We see it in the temples. We see temples aligned, in this case, to Draco, Alpha Draconis. We see, so that's the practice of aligning buildings to stars, right? But all this has to do with actually keeping time and keeping rotation and keeping patterns. And we'll kind of get into that in a moment. But the only thing that we're highlighting here right now is that the numbers had an Indian origin, as they're saying it in this Wikipedia or in their oldest annuals. But what I'm saying is what they're missing is to explain that those Indians, quote unquote, were Naga. And that these Naga were already on another level, as it states inside of books like the Mahabharata, but much more older books, the Rig Vedas. It states their powers, their abilities, and we can confirm that, because now some people are like, well, yeah, that's just the book is saying. No, we can confirm that when you do anything that happens to open your third eye, whether that's breathing, Ramtha, or DMT. You witness a real world, one that is more alive than this one is doubly dead. And sitting over a real world, sitting over the top of this one, a template or a temple. And then, of course, this kingdom here, the kingdom of the lost in many ways, because it's clear people don't understand what's going on with what I'm going to show you consistently here. So we locked in also because we decoded Jabbar. We also saw algebra, but because we were really just getting deep into the story of the giant Jabbar, We kind of blew completely by that algebra was even one of the words, even though that was like the first word. And that was definitely by design. Because what is algebra? It's numbers. And it comes from where? So they talk about, hey, it's, this is the Moorish, this is the Caliphate, so they go deep and deep into they have an Arabic origin, right? But that's the second round. So the Devangari, or these older number systems of the Naga, were the first round of the codes. And then the second round of codes came in as what we call the Arabic texts, right? Which in themselves, all this is pulled from the wazir, all this is pulled from the sharifs, all this is pulled from the spiritual world, quote unquote. Mainly through the faculty of a star, which we're going to talk about here in just a moment, but this occult knowledge or hidden knowledge is also prevalent within this ancient Islamic world. And our use of it today is quite, it's everywhere, right? Like we use the Arabic numbers, we practice algebra. In a nutshell, without algebra, there is no calculus, there is no trigonometry, there is none of that, because it is the foundation to those things. But more importantly, again, it's the foundation of the numbers when they finally make it into the English system. They come from the Arabic text, okay? And so we have these universal principles. There's a fundamental mathematical truths that apply across all cultures and times, right? This is allowing a lot of stuff to even be built and to function. The use of symbols to represent unknown quantities and relationships. This is a big important thing I need you to realize right now. It's a big point into today. So since, as they said, the 0-1 models right now have excelled in mathematics. This is the modern LLM strength is in mathematics at this stage is incredible. This is why there's going to be so many things happening in a very short period of time, because now it could do perfect math without errors. Crazy math, right? Stuff that people have been doing as equations a long time ago and still couldn't figure things out. But here's one thing that you should know. Since it does do math and letters are numbers, of course I'm in there running codes on it, asking it about things like my cipher here, which shows the relationship between letters. And so what I ask it to do is literally considering, like in languages like where the B is pronounced like the B in English is a V in that other language, like in Spanish. And in other parts of the world and in other languages where the letter for us, like an M, could be, or let's say like a D for us is a T for them, considering this, now summarize all of these letters, all of these numerical equivalents, and give me the core letters that remain. And the response, my great friends, was exactly what I've been thinking recently. And when I say recently, because before I thought, when I looked at this just at a glance, okay, that just means that there's probably like only 8 letters or something like that. And those are like the masters. And then everything else, all the other ones were created from that one. That's not how it works. But I came across this in a totally different way. I was just laying down and I was in a deep meditative state. And just a quiet voice said, you can see how it's all nothing, right? And the breakdown of that was everything that we do is momentary and fleeting. Even when we love somebody, we're loving them for that moment and then we're cooking. And then we're going somewhere, we're driving, and then we calling, and then we're constantly in motion. So everything it comes and it goes almost as if it was not even there. Like I was sitting in the chair 5 minutes ago and then I got up. What happened to the guy that was there in the chair 5 minutes ago? He's gone. He's nothing. And again, these are very complex things to understand, but the language may be able to help you because what it said back was actually considering all of these letters in which you placed here and the rest of the letters in the English alphabet. All of them are the same. What? All of them are the same. How could they all be the same when these are different octaves and tones and I'm using different words to explain different things? No, what you've done is you've assigned a different thing to the same thing. That's what a reality is. And I was like, whoa, hold on. It's coming apart. What do you mean? You've assigned literally what we've done is we've used the same thing to build everything. But see, we know this, but do we really know? Like they tell you, hey, everything is made out of the atom. So these are just atoms. You're like, no, this is a remote control. So what happens is it's based on like what level you're on. Some see this as only atoms. Some see this as a remote control and have no clue of how this could be made of this, could be made of this, and they all be the same thing. That's how deep the illusion is, okay? But that's the mastery of the illusion too, though. It's like that, just that silent moment where you just even start pondering that, like, yeah, you know what? I'm always moving, I'm always in motion. And so thus nothing is really static, nothing is really staying. You see what I mean? In that way. So I'm not gonna keep bubbling you down with that, but still take your own time and just realize what this reveals, that all the words you're saying are really one thing, one tone, one word, okay? One letter, okay? Because that also connects that when you're thinking about the sun spraying in the reality, because they say on the deepest level, the sun is the ego. We could not live without it. It'd be like trying to exist without a narrator telling you what you are, which is you talking to yourself. I'm, not even talking in language, but the radiance, okay? We radiate what we are. We don't need to be talking right now to already still be solidified in the seven Bomar and, the knowledge that I got to come through with. I radiate that like the sun. You see what I mean? So that's what they call the ego. That's the ultimate definition of it. It's something that can exist in that way and thus always be present in the game, talking to every person in the game. Okay? But let's keep going. So we find first, as we enter into this sanctum of wisdom, we must enter in with this particular scripture. And I saw another mighty angel come down from heaven, clothed with a cloud, and a rainbow was upon his head, and his face was as it were the sun, and his feet as pillars of fire. And he had in his hand a little book open. And he set his right foot upon the sea and his left foot on earth, and cried with a loud voice as when a lion roareth. And when he had cried, 7 thunders uttered their voices. And when the 7 thunders had uttered their voices, I was about to write. And I heard a voice from heaven saying unto me, seal up those things which the 7 thunders uttered, and write them not. So I've talked about this scripture before because in one of my numerous trips through the Bible, reading it front to back 3 times, this was one of those scriptures that stuck out because it's always one of those things like, man, I wonder what was in that book. It just leaves you like there, like, yo, what was in there where the angel had to come in and say, yo, don't write that down, okay? So it is one of those moments as a Christian, okay? Because you're just deeply enthralled into the scripture, okay? But as I said, with anything that resonates to even the very core of millions of beings, there's going to be some truth to it. It's going to be truth mixed with falsehoods. Just like even the cards shuffle into each other. So you're going to have it all shuffled even together, but there's going to be truth ringing around everywhere. So in this case, what we're talking about today is that book. Because that book has actually been referred to in other ways, like you cannot add or take away from it. Okay. And then at that point, people automatically assume that we were talking about the Bible and that there should be no adding and taking away from the scripture, when me and you both know they didn't took away and added from the scripture. I mean, come on. Nothing has been taken away and added more. But that's not the book that's being referred to, because this book wasn't written. It wasn't revealed. Now it is. And the reason why you can't add or take away from it is because it's a numerical sequence. If you add another number, you throw off the sequence. If you move the order, you throw off the sequence. And thus, it doesn't work. No knowledge can be gained. Remember what I said about this, because again, it's like, this is not, it's a little book. The Bible is not a little book, homie. It's not little. So we're not talking about any of those books. We're talking about something small, the code. 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7. So let's keep going. I'll show it to you here on the screen. So another saying, you can't reinvent the wheel, son. Don't reinvent the wheel. How long has that statement been around? I'm sure you will go to ancient cultures and find another translation for that same statement. You can't reinvent the wheel. So you can't add and take away from it, and you can't reinvent it. What I'm doing is that based on patterns, I'm surmising all of the things that seem to be related to this secret, small, little book, so that it checks the, can you add and take away from it? Nope. If you throw the sequence off, you'll see what happens here in a moment. So here's another entry into this. Does anyone remember when Tesla said that if someone could discern or knew, let's just get it from verbatim. Tesla said to have believed that the number 369 held the secrets of the universe. He also associated with manifestation technique that uses these numbers, known as a 369 code and a 369 method. Okay? And everybody that is familiar with Tesla knows that he said, if you could figure out the secrets between the 369, you would have the secrets of the universe, right? Does anybody know that? By raise of hands? Okay. I'm about to tell you something. What if what Tesla was really saying was, it's not 369, it's the numbers that are missing from 369. Because in the code, 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7, the only numbers that are missing are 3, 6, 9. Okay, let's continue to go forward. So I'm positing here that everything is a secret in these levels of wisdom. You speak cryptically. You speak almost backwards in many ways to hide the code. So I'm saying that, if Tesla made the statement, what he was saying is, hey, it's not the 369 per se. It's the numbers that are there when you remove 369, which is the code. But let's keep going. So what is the preface here? Because there must be a preface, and this is why we need to desist for a moment, but we'll still keep the numbers here on the screen. The preface here is that there are 52 cards in the playing deck. There is a strong notion that those 52 cards are the 52 weeks in a year. And that the deck itself is a design not only of a calendar, but also a coding system that predicts realities. And this is still highly dependent on a few things, though. And let me go to them. And that's why I said, so what is the premise? One, the divination system is based on the following. One, time. The cards must first be aligned according to the ruling hours. I'm giving to you the information of why this system supposedly works. And we're just going to keep it all like that because there's a way bigger mystery here. But right away, somebody's like, oh no, oh my goodness, are you going to tell me that these tarot cards really work and some gypsy reading your fortune telling? What I'm saying, listen to what I'm saying. One, in order for the system to work, the first thing that had to happen was time needed to be considered. And so right away, if the cards weren't aligned to the time in which they represent, which is called the ruling hours. So this literally means somebody has to cast the time before they can even read. I can remember, jumping into one of those the mall people, where they'd be at the mall reading the cards and all that. I would never do it, but, I had a girlfriend. She was like crazy about it. I'd just be over there talking all bad about the lady and everything. But she was not observing time. And I've seen this happen on so many occasions. They never looked at the watch and said what time it is. So right away, you could never use the system if you didn't align the cards to the time. And there's a reason for this. So I'm just giving you what is the power within the system. The next one is magnetism. A person has their own unique magnetic signature that corresponds to their path. It's so strong that when lining up the first main principles, which is the ruling hours of the time, the rest of this begins to fall into place. Okay, this is where the visible becomes in tune with what's going on, is because each person has the magnetic signature of the character that they actually represent in the game. The occult force. Okay, this is that the symbols on the cards, which are the diamonds, the hearts, the spades, the clubs, they've remained as such for a countless period of time, despite the numerous efforts to change them. So everybody was trying to redo this at one stage in time because it boiled down to even being a game people played called trick taking. And so this original, though, and let me enter into this. There was different systems, but the core systems had specific symbols. And those symbols meant something. That something has survived to this day. For instance, a heart, of course, is symbolic for love. A diamond is, of course, symbolic for wealth. A spade is symbolic, like a plowshare, for servitude. A club is symbolic for warfare. And these kind of things, like law, these kind of things. So these core symbols still in themselves make up the core fundamentals of the game. But I desist, because the last thing that I want you to do is to just think that this is just a card game. But what I'm telling you is that it has survived in the cards. Now we need to look at just a little bit of math of what this number is capable of doing. Let us begin, because this is a great mystery. It is the secret of the Magi. Through it, great things can happen. Without it, one will most likely be lost, especially in this kind of reality. So let's do this. Let's put my notes over here. Let's get this up on the screen. And let's just look at the anomalies that surround the number. The first anomaly is that so how do we derive to this number? First of all, like, how do we get to this number? I think that's the best place to start, of course. And we get to this number. I guess you can't make the calculator bigger, but we can pull it down here. We get to this number by performing a simple mathematical equation. 365, not 360. That was even cryptic right there. 365. Why? Because it takes us 365 and a quarter time to move around the sun. So that's what we're talking about. If you saw the sun as a disk of information anyway, you would get the complete when you went around one complete rotation. So 360 is not as vital to us in this reality when it comes to performing calculations about how this reality works. If we went on a 360-degree calendar, time would be off all the time. Literally, like, we would be switching through season, the stars would be in different places, but we would be like, yo, it's this date. And it like, man, the star is not in that place though. So remember, this is based on where the stars are. That's why this is the Star of Bethlehem, the real one. But we'll talk about that here in a moment. So we have 365 divided by 7. And we divide it by 7. Why? Just to show you that none of this is like arbitrary. None of this is made up. How many days of the week are there? 7. In most places in the world, except for those the most obscure, they have a 7-day week. So we divide as a ritual every day as a populace. The year or the whole, the Sun King himself, into 7 parts by using this 7-day week. Okay? And so obviously, when we take this division, what do we get? We get 52.14285714, and it'll continue 285714. And it'll continue 2857, okay? So this is called a cyclic number. There aren't that many of them. There's actually only 4. And the other ones they're multiple digits, like 1/17 is another cyclic number, but the number spans out so far to crack the code that way. Wow. This is the most base way because it's 1/7. It's the lowest simplified number that still replicates the cyclic code, which I'm going to explain to you why this is important in a little bit. But let's just understand where these numbers coming from. And so when we take this number 142857, okay, which we also saw, let's look at it again. When we saw the mathematical equation, we took 365 and we divided it by 7, and this gave us 52, right? When you round that, because we have 52 weeks in a year, and this is how we determine, as I said, it's 52 and a quarter. But look at the number back here, 142857, and it's going to continue ad infinitum because it's cyclic. So now let's go on. Beside revealing the mystery of just that, this is what happens when we times this number between 1 and 6. We stop at 7 because 7 times 142857 gives us 999,999, which I have to explain later because that also is the mystery as I mentioned, of the 9, which are outside of the matrix or outside of time, thus governing, let's see, 7 times 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7, 9, 9, 9, 9, 9, 9, okay? So what I want to show you is that notice when we times this by 2 and we get this number, 2, 8, 5, 7, 1, 4, that's only this number scrambled. Same thing here, same thing here, same thing here, same thing here. We never get 3, 6, or 9 when we're timesing this number between 1 to 6. Okay, so that's another anomaly. But now we're going to get into the deepest aspects of what this seems to hint towards or mean. So, at one space and time, a star became so revered and also so feared that the very mention of it already meant something was going to go down. Somebody was either going to get expelled or worshiped. It's also known as the Star of Raphan. It's also known as the Star of David. It's also known as the Star of Solomon. It's also known as the Star of Saturn. It's also known as the star or the Magan star. It's also known as the crown of the Magi. You see here on the right, on the reverse of the Talisman of Solomon, you obviously see the Israeli flag. You obviously know the Star of David, as they call it. But I have to tell you that they're all misleading in many ways. They are all plagiarizations of a system of power so strong that the last time it was recorded in the Bible, it was obviously forbidden for anyone to use. Because as I keep pointing out, the authors of the Bible seem to be a part of, not seem to be, they are a part of the hijack. Because all of what they put together, which later on became the 78 card deck, was how to create a new matrix that people are stuck in because they have associated their deity with a man rather than themselves. So let's just look at this really briefly and let's go through some notes here. Let me come down one level and just kind of get this here. So we'll go further and first also address what would be an elephant in the room later, which is the 78 card deck. Okay? Because any mystic knows there's another deck and that this deck actually has characters in it, right? It's like the Fool, the Magician, the Hierophant, right? The Wheel of Fortune. What about that one? This is what you need to know. This is how new matrices get created. So it's obvious that the 52 card system has something to do with the weeks in the year. It definitely has something to do with the number 7, which are the days of the week. And I'm already opening up for you that there is some mathematical stuff going on with it that is so odd, it can't be replicated in other numbers. And since the whole matrix is numbers at its core, this one would find itself at being at least in the rank of the top 3 significant numbers in the matrix. I'm saying it's number 1, especially for this time, because it deprograms and it decodes the matrix. But as it is, there is another deck floating around that is used for divination. And this is the 78 card deck, in which 22 you're generally familiar with, meaning that the 78 card deck, let me see if I have notes on this here, or visuals. No, there's no visual card on this. So the 78 card deck is a composition of 26 extra cards. Because when you add 52 to 26, you get what? 78. If you divide 52 by 2, you get what? 26. So in many ways, it's like this additional 26 that's added is like a new leg of the journey. It kind of even goes like a quarter of the way, or excuse me, half of the way through, but it kind of leaves off halfway, meaning that if you have a 78 card deck, you're literally driving back through the tarot again, but kind of like, not the tarot in a way that this is a wheel that we're talking about. But I'm just trying to get you to understand that if there's 52 and that's a perfect year, why would there be 78? And I think that this is the secret to occultism right here. Because an additional 26 were added into the game without you even knowing it. Because the people didn't know the game in the first place. What are these extra 26 characters? Meaning that, okay, 7. So just tell me, out of the 52 cards that are in another deck, and then there's 78 in the other ones, do 52 of them line up to the other 52 in the deck? Yes. They have their equivalent, but there's 26 extra. Okay, 7, what are those cards? 22 of them are what's called this major arcana, which are literally these characters, more characters. There's now a devil. Look at what I'm saying to you. There are other cards now added to the game when the original game, it doesn't have a devil. But this new one, which has these archetypical characters, 22 archetypical characters, as much as we, love the magician, but this is a new game. And also, who are those other 4 that are added? 4 knights. 4 knights, in a way that I'm saying to sit around the 4 corners to protect this new world created of 22 characters that are all sitting in these different positions, from the Hierophant to the Queen to, what the High Priestess, etc. All those cards, right? Which are not in the old deck. So I'm going to keep going further, though, because I needed to still address, hey, the 78, I'm not like saying, hey, 78 is bad. I'm not saying 78 is good. What I'm talking today is transcending good and bad. If you're still sitting on a binary good or bad quotient, good luck. The matrix blurs. And as a master, you need to understand there's another there's a 78, and this 78 was called a trick. It was a trick-taking game. This is the term that's used for playing cards back in the day. Trick-taking, right? Supposedly this just meant that if everybody threw out a card in order from the dealer, whoever had the highest card would take everybody else's card, and then by the end of the game, whoever had the highest score would be the winner, thus taking the trick. Again, I didn't write this. I'm just explaining to you why they call it the trick-taking game. So, in this way, the solar book of natural order had been altered throughout history. People would find these cards and they would just assume it was a game, even when they found them in Mamluk, Egypt, which is the first record of the cards themselves, and then France comes later. But they found a deck. It had coins, cups, viceroys, and a second viceroy. And people were like, oh, they were playing this game too. No. They were using it as a game, and they had already started altering it. And in that way, even when people picked it up after that, they didn't have the original one, because the original one is so factual, you can't change it. Now, let's look at this. That's been on your screen. The Star Tarot. Okay, so we have, notice how, and this is, we're going to go into now another mathematical anomaly, because we say, so why would we line it up on this star? Because the star is like a framework in itself. It is a temple in itself. We have 6 numbers here, 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7. So if we happen to map them counterclockwise onto the edge of a 6-pointed star, this is what we get. Every number you add adjacent to the other number will equal 9. So let's look at the top. If you wonder what that is, that's an ace of spade. It stands for the number 1, which is Mercury. 1, now let's go all the way across from that, all the way down. We are now at a 9 of hearts, right? An 8 of hearts. 8 plus 1 is 9. Now go to the other one. Let's go counterclockwise. 4. Okay, let's go across. There's a 5 of spades there. 4 plus 5 is 9. We go to the next card. There's a 2 of spades there, or clubs, I think that is. You go across, and that is what? A 7 of hearts. 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7. Okay, so when you map this into another plane, the numbers sit across from each other, and when you add them up, they equal 9. What happens if I change the order of this? It messes all the math up. It throws off everything. None of that works. So there's more mysteries here. The reason why they put 2 zodiacs at the bottom of the top triangle is that equals 12. When you have 2 zodiacs at the bottom of each triangle and you add all 6 of them together, which would be times 2, all 12 of them, you would add them all 6 times 2, it would be 12. This is your 12 months of the year, because remember, this is math. 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7, open says me. Then from there, on the tips, you have the rulers, regardless of whatever they're talking about today. Neptune and everybody's mama. These stars rule over these zodiacs because of the traits. So these were the only ones that were important because they were used as like a easy mathematical measuring tool for what you were about to deal with. So we're going to keep going further into this mystery of how this star became evil, despite it's the star of Bethlehem, it is the star of David, it is the star of Solomon, it is the crown of the Magi. Notice how we had cracked the code already with the Sator square. Let me get that up on the screen here. And again, all of these words, it's like you feel like this is what they've been saying is evil because they are so misleading. Their goal was to confuse everybody. This is the tower that crumbled because you cannot build anything without using a perfect code, or else everybody will just be oblivious to what's going on. You'd be able to brainwash them and all types of stuff because they wouldn't be able to back up what it is that you're saying, which should be backed up by ma'at, which is math or truth. I can't just take another guy's word for it, like 4,000 years ago. Are you serious? How are you quoting something from 4,000 years ago only? You need a backup to say this is exactly what happened for something that long ago, and this is why we have a mathematical backup of our knowledge. So cats can't come and just make up stuff and create new religions and completely dispose what is the truth, because it's just going to get us all lost then. So Sator or Repo Tenet Opera Rotus, which we've studied heavily, it's a palindrome. There are the numbers associated with it. Let's just break it down real quick. What do these words mean? Sator, the farmer or sower, someone who plants seeds and initiates growth. This is why we keep trying to highlight for these new modern occultists that the character in which they keep calling Satan in the Hindu text plays Sat, or basically the old father of the system. This is Darth Vader now for them. And then they got Luke, who plays the role of Jesus. You see what I mean? Because they're trying to get rid of Saturn. You see what I mean? The old system, that's what I would say, the disrespect for the ancestors. But yet the entire Old Testament is a Saturnalian work in itself. Like, look at the sacrifices going on. But this is not obvious for most people. So as we see here, Sator is referred to because Saturn was known as cedar. Even his tree is the cedar tree. But a cedar just means something that is ejecting seeds into the land and fecundating and populating. So who is Saturn? That old king. Anyone who's wearing a crown is symbolic of Saturn, but Saturn's crown is the crown of the Magi. Saturn's crown is these numbers. But let's desist for a moment because that won't become so obvious for somebody who's not looking. Arepo, interpreted here as a plow. Now we call the pentagram a plow, by the way. So it's already saying Sator, who is Saturn, he holds the plow. Or excuse me, he holds basically he plants the seeds. The farmer holds the plows, the worker the wheels. Okay, this is the interpretation ultimately. But one is holding the wheel and the other one is holding the plow. That means that one is holding the pentagram and one is holding the hexagram. And if you can't hold both of those, you can't create a reality. Let's keep going. That's the symbolic to Arepo. Arepo is interpreted here as a plow. Now, the plow is the pentagram. The pentagram is also man, right? In a physical body. He is Arepo. That's why this word was always the secret word, because it's like the secret is that man is Arepo. He is the pentagram in the physical body. And I'm saying he as a denotation to anyone in flesh that is a human being, not necessarily a woman or a man. They both contain the same word. So through Arepo, this is the Latin word. And this says it's placed in the phrase and it makes sense as a functional object connected to farming. Okay, this is the kind of definitions that you will get out of systems these days because they are clueless. That's why we're building consciousness, conscious responses, in tune metaphysics, truth into our systems, training them on truth. Let's keep going. Tenet. Holds or maintains, implying control, imbalance, or responsibility. If you cannot hold and maintain the world and keep it in balance, it's over. Opera, works signifying labor, productivity, and craftsmanship. That's why we have that word opera. Everybody knows it. But this is what it means, as in operations. And then we have rotus, which means wheels, likely referring to physical wheels is what they think. No, I'm talking about chakras, but we'll get into that later because how many of them do you have according to the system? 7. Okay. All right. So we got 7 days of the week and 7 chakras, and people can't see somehow that we're talking about a composite, meaning like a holographic creation in itself that's a mirror of another much more larger creation, like the 7 candelabras, heaven on earth, and these kind of concepts, right? But let's keep going. Remember, though, why we're dropping the knowledge. All of these words that you're seeing here fit into each other in a very strange way because you can spell Sator from the left and down the right. You can spell Rotus from the right and back to the left, right? So let's line it up a little bit. This is what truth is. It has to be able to prove itself beyond like what other people are talking about, or else you will get lost because they're always in some weird zone and position. Like we all move. So he could be on the point one day and then had a bad morning, or be influenced by another star. And then all of a sudden, this is why we can't have that in the sacred mystery. We cannot get lost on the path. It's too perilous. But the head crack of all this is that we're actually in the netherworld, but I'm not going to talk about that right now. That's why it's perilous. It's like, why is it perilous? Because we're in the netherworld, and most didn't wake up to realizing that there were 7 locusts below us. They say it was below us. I'm telling everybody to get with it. We're in the underworld already. Osiris is all that stuff that we're seeing in Egypt and all that. That's what got us here. This is a reality created behind the decimal point, because this number is 0.142857, by the way. And if every symbol in math is that of a maximum principle, a decimal point in front of a decimal point would be that you have entered the realm of the living. +1, okay? But if you are behind the decimal point, which I'm insisting these low vibratory realities are now existing in through this debased sense of consciousness that is now spread, we're behind the decimal point in a world that keeps repeating like a cycle, the same process over and over again. And this was the mystery of Osiris. This was the mystery. This is the Egyptian mysteries. It's a world. Now, people keep thinking, hey, no, the afterlife, you're going to go to the afterlife. No, there's many different worlds. This is the afterlife, though. We don't die. We slide. And if you don't have bearings to know the truth, if you can't reset your astrolabe and your compass, then you can get shipwrecked, and then you'll be out there believing in all these truths and half-truths that are mainly exploiting. You got to be able to go back to the numbers. So again, as I said here, notice still how, though, we're talking about a wheel. And that way you can start putting all this stuff together, because the only wheel is the sun. When you start really putting this together, you start realizing, oh, this is all about creating a sun. That's what 666 is. It's 6 sides, 6 triangles. You see what I mean? What are we talking about? We did the decoding in the Greek to Megatherion, the great wild beast when it comes into English. You got folks naming themselves after it, wanting to be it, but then representing it in a dark way, in a dim way, and thus they are not it, but still shining, trying to shine in front of everyone. As the scripture says, cursed is any man who hangeth upon a tree. And then they try, in Old Testament, they justify this by saying Jesus became a curse for all man to absolve them of the sins. What? The ram in the thicket is the symbolic sacrifice. Jesus is taking this role, but this religion, this practice specifically is abhorred, meaning that it was shown to not be in the solar book of truth. This is a fabrication. It's a makeup, and we know it because the Nagas have the original crocodile fat initiation of anointing, and none of their texts are in the Bible, because if it was, then everybody would figure out, whoa, this is about, this is on some other stuff. And because it's occultism, everything that you're talking about inside of spiritual books don't conform to the nubile conversation that often goes on between untrained initiates and untrained neophytes. You see what I mean? It opens up to something very serious, as serious as your grandmother's house. You need to get off the furniture, not say anything, don't speak when adults are speaking, and poke your lips in. You see what I mean? This is what we're talking about. So, of course, they want to make it like a fanfare, la-di-da, and we're talking about how to usher souls after they die and break. And the entities that understand how to take you through characters, spaces and time and experiences over and over and over and over and over again in a world that they told you it was 5. I'm telling you, it's 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7 cyclic number behind a decimal. That's the location. That's Osiris's palace. Okay, let's keep going here. So we also find, let's go back to our numbers, because again, you keep hitting them in the face with the numbers, and that way they will eventually see it. It's not like a argument. You're not going to argue truth, are you? Unless you want to be perceived as a fool. So let's go to another set of numbers. But as I said, most are still on that first card. It's like the beginning. Let's go here. And let's look at the numerics real quick, just so you understand how this then lays out in the cards. So when we get to the original deck, we have 52 playing cards and their spot value. This is simple. It's simply how many spots are on the card. And if the card is above spots, meaning that it's above 10, like a jack, if it's 1 position away from the 10, it only gets a 1. 2, it gets a 2. 3, it gets a 3. You see what I mean? So it's like the spots are very easy to calculate because they're just the numerical value of the card. So when we take the deck and we get the spot value, we find that the 4 kings, which is 4 times 13, because that's their value, is 52. 4 queens, 48, 44, 40, 36, and 144. And then the Joker. And the Joker's introduction to the game is the most interesting. Like I was telling everybody, you see how we were so close. We were there. It was being teased. You can't get it all at one time. You got to be able to comprehend it. But the position of the Joker was when the Joker entered into the society, when they were putting these cards together and it entered into the deck, it was the completion. Because of the rotation, it denotes that December 31st doesn't belong to any card. How does this work? Every person has a birthday, and that birthday is on a card. There are 7 people who hold, or seven birthdays that hold the position of 1 card. For example, each birthday has a card. 7 dates on the calendar hold 1 card. I.e., the King of Hearts is on January 1st because it's the first one to step out. It's on March 30th, May 29th, July 28th, September 26th. Oh, give me 1 second here. Give me 1 second here. There's a need for accuracy here. 1 second. Let me pull this back real quick. I need to run this again. I can see some inaccuracies. And you can see inaccuracies when you deal with the numbers because the numbers don't add up. Give me 1 second. And this is what I mean by when you have systems that you could just do math on. Give me 1 second. Okay, so this system is known about, meaning there's books on this, right? There's like a big book and it shows you, and what I'm scrolling through now is to show you that when it rolls out, all the cards roll out. So that's the 5 of clubs. Then the cards keep rolling out. And then as the birth dates continue, and the reason why I knew that data wasn't exact because the King of Hearts is on October the 22nd. But you could do this by simply taking the numbers and doing the math and dividing the circle and then spreading out the cards. Okay, so that's how these days are come up with. They're not arbitrary. They're the exact numerical number of that day. And through this system, they were able to determine also the number of planets, meaning that the actual number of planets, the actual number of chemicals, the actual numbers of spirits. This is what was derived from this system. Now, this system is tried already. So it's not like well, maybe that worked or maybe it didn't. And I talked about earlier why it works, okay? And there was one final thing also in this, and that's about who is doing it. Meaning that it's not as simple as going to a person and saying, hey, give me a reading of my tarot, right? Which is divination, as they call it, right? And this is why in this text, there's many texts that speak against divination. And it's because when somebody is divining, but they are not divine, nothing but confusion can happen. Actually, let's take a look at that real quick here. So we have in Acts 7, chapter 7, 43, which actually equals 7:2. Yeah, ye took up the tabernacle of Moloch and the star of your god Remphan, figures which ye made to worship them, and I will carry you away beyond Babylon. Okay, and when you go and you research this, the star of Remphan, or the star of the god Remphan, the 6-pointed star pops up, okay? And so one could then like conclude that, wow, this means that this star is evil, according to how they put it, right? Yet, again, the same country that they endorse, Israel, has this on the flag. But this is where the Holy Land is, and this is where, you see what I mean? So which one is it? And also Solomon and also David had this star on their shield. So which one is it? Is it real life or is it metaphor? What I'm saying is the shield is the sun. This sun, it rotates. You see what I mean? It's like blinding light rotating because it illuminates the path of darkness, which is the future, which nobody supposedly knows except for the Magi. Because the Magi, using the crown of the Magi, know how to read person, places, things. This is why they had to even put in there into their plagiarization, the Magi show up. Because they were following the star. And they said, is a new king born? You see what I mean? Who was the first king? This is what we're talking about. We're not talking about fairy tales and future creations. We're talking about how the symbolism connects and explains to you the truth, and then people pervert the truth. Okay? So as it states, let's go further, that there are clues here that show you that this star was used by giants, meaning that whoever the Gibberim were and Al-Jabbar, that star, which I said is the Sharif, that's why a sheriff wears a 6-pointed star. It is to deal with spirits in any shape or form that they come in. Without a Sharif, like populaces found themselves dealing with unwieldy spirits. This also is because of the conditions that even a lot of these people were living in. When you don't have septic systems, when you have lots of funk, stank, darkness, desolation, waste, war, there's only dark entities roaming the land. Some of these entities would even come into good places, and the Sharif would have to deal with them. This is the same role that the police play today. When a cat gets too possessed on that green, he will go and try to rob. So somebody's got to be there. They show up with their badges and shields and stars in order to stop that. And I don't care what nobody say, it would be worse without police. You just got to admit, because every time somebody do something crazy, you want to bust them upside the head, right? And the only thing stopping you from doing that is that you will probably go to jail. So if that law or check and balance system's not there, things run amok. But you got to understand, it's not going to be some have thine own way, Lord, that's going to come deal with a monster. You see what I mean? So this is why it doesn't do well for your journey to just stay confined to good or evil, because some are on different paths. Some will indeed need a shield. Some will need a driver and a chaser. You see what I mean? It just all depends on what terrain you're covering. So as it is, though, this star gets demonized and this system of knowledge gets demonized because, of course, when it falls into the hands of the gypsies, what is that, like a fake Egyptian or something? But it falls into the hands of the gypsies, right? And they start reading the tarot with it on people, but then inheriting the curse, as it's stated. If you use the system for your own gain and profits, you will realize you will be hit with the reflux current. You can't game the game. You see what I mean? It's like, it's not a game in that way. It's a game because it has characters, not that it's not real or it's not going to have repercussions when you play it a certain way. We're living the repercussions, whether they're good or bad. So it says the Rephaim appeared in the Ugaritic as the name Ripu'uma, a plural form generally translated as the mighty ones or the divine ancestral spirits, okay? This is how the Rephaim got into the netherworld first. And then the netherworld later on became the place where people inhabit. But there are multiple layers to this reality. There's not just because, see, when they describe the lower lokas, they tell you it's like some of the beings, or a lot of the beings, they have riches, but they enslave other beings. They have like a lot of glamour and opulence, like you would see like a Beverly Hills house, but it'd be a straight demon living there. You see what I mean? Like, doesn't give a shit about anybody. It's got everybody slaving and all that kind of stuff. You see what I mean? This is the depiction. So it doesn't say that hell is like this place that it's just like Mordor or something like that. Also, when you understand the hyperdimensional aspects of this, everything is here now. So this does mean that you can reach higher lokas, which are supposed to be 14 above the world, in this state, in states like nihilism, nirvana, states where you go into the aesthetic of breathing and removing yourself from all the attachments of the matrix and cleaning up your body and getting rid of the weight inside your system, things that none of these fake spiritual scriptures talk about. They don't even talk about diet. Really, not in any way that would produce a biologically healthy person. It's always something auspicious about the God and what the God wants, right? So it's just that awareness. So as it says here, the Rephaim are not simply ghosts, but exalted beings linked to the royal cult of the divine assembly. They may have been seen as protectors, patrons, or conveyors of blessings, underscoring the idea of ongoing relationships between the living and these powerful ancestral presences, because despite whatever position the books want to put them in, people want to put them in, it doesn't take away from them being the predecessors. You see what I mean? If you want to bring them into fleshly people story kind of format, it doesn't take away from the foundation in which they hewn, as it says, laying the foundation for this space, putting in the pillars for this space. You see what I mean? But then what is this space though? That if you got problems, you need to take it up with the designers or the architect, if you may. But to just deny the construct and how it's built would be to deny the numbers within math and within nature. You see what I mean? So it's just like you would end up in a weird zone because you would just like be denying all the truths. So it goes on, and this is just the connection that we want to make here, that Og, let me just say it specifically, the literal translation, for Og, for only Og, king of Bashan, who is spoken about in the Bible, remained of the remnant of the Rephaim. Behold, his bedset was a headstand of iron, and it is not of the Rabbah. And it says, is it not in Rabbah of the children of Ammon, 9 cubits its length, 4 cubits its width, by a man's cubit? And I have here, no, Og is described as the last Rephaim, indicating there was a race of giant people. But we've already talked about that. That's Jabbar. That's Brutus. That's Bland the Blessed. They're brutes. That's Troy. You see what I mean? And the bedstand by description, this is the giant for real. But what are we talking about? Og, king of Bashan, was the last of the giants, right? Just understand that. Og, according to the scripture, was the last of the giants. Who's Og? This is when you start realizing the Gothic influence on the Bible. And really, which we can't get into now, the Gothic influence of King James, who also set up Jamestown and wrote the King James Version. The Germanic god is named Gud or Gudin, right? But Gudin is an Og. Just like dog and God have this OG in the word, this is the thing about decoding the matrix. You need to then take the letter and then put every syllable consonant in front of it and then break down the story of the word. But again, the Germanic god Gud or Gudin, who's Odin or Odin's son. You see what I mean? Like, this is where that comes from. You see what I mean? And that is nothing like they're all over the place. This is like, oh my goodness, you just tied in that with that. Let's just go to the origins. But as you should know, the giants used this system. This is how they navigated. This is how they built. This is how they divined. This is how they taught all the sorcery and all this kind of stuff through math. Like all the other stuff that, the sacrifices and all that, that is all stuff that goes on in the experience. You see what I mean? Like, that's just stuff that ends up going on. Some people, there's a simple phenomena that happens when people start getting into this. Well, how much can I give to gain favor? And then they get into this. I'll give you this. I'll give you the first of my crops. I'll give you my pure devotion. I'll give you my own child. This is the kind of rituals and rites of practice that is going on in these modern traditions and the mindset there. They go too far because they don't have the rest of they blow the journey. They miss the door. They all off in the netherworld now, doing netherworld kind of things with a netherworld kind of mentality. And then puffed up with pride, like they really know what they're talking about. This is weird. It's like, instead of thinking about what other people are thinking about what you're saying, why don't you think about what you're saying? And why don't you sit into your knowledge and see how it's benefiting you? See how it changes your world. See if things are off, calibrate it, and find something to calibrate it with. That's what we're talking about. So we now have this final part here. And this final part is, because this is obviously a to be continued, there's more. And it's also understanding, this part is about understanding the core power within a number. Okay. And so I'm going to give you some numbers today. Some of the other ones I'm still correlating and putting the math and things together on them. You could say the jury's still out. But when we're talking about one, and we're just saying, what is the maximum that this stands for? When we're talking about the number one, as I mentioned, the easiest way to identify with understanding what it is the ego itself. The voice that is inside of your mind animating the reality for you. But it is more than a voice. It causes you to radiate your existence. Thus, even when you're asleep, you still can get back to this world because you can actually see your own light. Okay? And then you have two. This is all divisions. Any kind of dualities stand for this number. It is, as a core principle, day and night. Just as you look, you see day and night. So I see a sun, and this caused my world to have day and night. Without the sun, the world would just be night. It doesn't mean that there wouldn't be life, though, because the life was going on in the deep before the sun got here. And that's another story. So then we have the 4 seasons, okay? Or the number 4. 4 seasons and a cross, of course, right? This 4 seasons is, of course, our 4 directions. Right? But primarily, when you're in this kind of construct, you get that split of 4. And that's a master in that way. North, south, east, west, fire, earth, wind, water. You see what I mean? And then you have, of course, because this is a calendar, we're talking about your seasons. So your seasons need to be divided by 6. This is where 6 comes in as a number. But these are, see, what these numbers, 3, 6, 9, come in as abstract, almost hidden components in order to support the next stage, but play themselves behind the scenes, meaning that you don't just directly define them. You actually see them supporting or the structure itself. Okay? And then we have 7. This is the division of the reality. Like when they talk about the gods decided that they were going to split the reality amongst themselves. This is according to these scriptures, right? They divide the world. This went to this God, that went to that God. Now we're sitting here with days of the week named after gods. And if we don't want to conduct the ritual, it doesn't seem to matter, because when Monday come around, we'll be doing what Monday requires us to do, Tuesday and so on. And then when Friday hits, we'll be doing what Venus likes to do. And when Saturn hits on Saturday, we'll be doing what Saturn wants to do. You see what I mean? From an energetic level, because these are planetary energies, right? As I said before, remember that fish. You know, the fish you can't change. You can make yourself either susceptible or impervious to planetary energies, but still understand, just as soon as the full moon will cause a rise in a man and the movement of certain stars will cause a change of the mind, there are things that the vapor, the ether, the celestial bodies are doing to our vessels and to nature that we have maybe not actually even thought of or accounted for, because we can't make that correlation. However, this system could make the correlations because it has all the numbers of the spirits. So it sounds wild that spirits have numbers. That just shows you how far behind people are. They think that once you get to spirits, no more numbers are left. But we are spirits, and we're here talking about numbers inside of a fleshly body. Wake up. It wasn't as simple as everybody wanted it to be. This is why we had to have our elders. We had to have our teachers. We had to have those who specialize in certain things to broaden our minds to what we knew not. So we continue. We have 12. This is obviously the months, right? Because that then division into the zodiac gives us 6 times 2, which is 12. Night and day, meaning that the position of the zodiacs are literally to be opposite of each other. This is why we get stuff going on in the game. This is why conflict is also a part of the Funkandation cycle. 2 things coming together, there's going to be some friction. That's the best way to say it. When 2 things, 2 opposites come together, there's going to be some friction. Yet every single day, 2 opposites, a male and a female, come together and create friction and then produce life from that friction, right? So this is the natural way of how the matrix works, how the system works. It's got an on-off, a yin-yang behavior to it, but it also has a center. And this is also another thing that's very important to realize, that the mystery between the numbers is actually hidden within a small equation. In this small equation, rather than trying to explain it to you, I can only show you and have you ponder it on your own. And this small equation is to simply show that still within the numbers 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7, you have 114, which is 7 times, you have 14, which is 7 times 2. Let me blow this up a little bit here. Let me just write it here. So you have 14, which is what? 7 times 2 is 14. You have 28, which is 7 times 4. And then you have 57. But 7 times 8 equals 56. And we have 1 extra. Who is this? This is what you'll begin to notice in the anomaly, that there's 1 hidden, 1 always watching. Let me get myself on the screen here. This is what I'm saying about like where the mysticism really comes in, because you find this reoccurring thing that there's 1 that's hidden, like it's watching, but nobody knows that it's there. This is what I was saying before. We already got the answer of what that was. The firstborn, the one of the family that is responsible for playing the intercessor between us and the ancestors, all there is, right? This is the role that they have Jesus in now, when really it's supposed to be a real member of your family. And always does remain as that there's one that is hidden, one that you don't know about, and it's watching over everything that's going on with you. And it's custom to you. This also could be a symbolic in itself to the sun itself. The sun being more of like, you see it, but you don't really know what it's doing. You don't know how it's operating and how it's watching over you and carving out your next level of life and experience, etc. You see what I mean? This also is what takes a 6 into a 7, what takes an 8 into a 9, which you'll start learning that those transition points, what takes a 12 into a 13. Okay? Like, what is a 13? A 13 is 12 around 1. Jesus and the disciples, 12 around 1. This is solar symbolism. The one, the sun is sitting in the center and all the zodiac are around the sun. You see what I mean? Nothing to do with what is going on in people's minds today. It's an introspection, a genuflection. It's something that takes you to a certain stage of your awareness about you, where it's going to be the most important, not with everybody else. When your eyes close, their eyes don't. They have an imagination that we're all leaving at the same time and going to the same place. This is a continuum. We arrive on all sides in different spaces. This is like a deck also coming into these matrices. The dealer, who, as I mentioned before, this is also very important. The dealer, because what was also mentioned is beyond the time, beyond the magnetism, and beyond the symbols that are the power within this opus, all of it still relies on the dealer. So meaning that even if the person, let's say you try to go to another person and say, hey, I heard you do something with the cards. And my friend Seven was talking about something with the cards today. Go ahead and do my reading. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. For me personally, I can't even see a reason why to do my reading. I'll just live life and watch the patterns. I don't need cards to show me what I can do naturally, okay? This is like a tracing board system in itself, right? It's a way to, when they lose everything, to put everything back together, right? But you can count on that if the person doesn't even know what we're talking about right now, this is the wrong person to read your card because they can't divine. They don't know how to actually tell you once the cards flip over, what is really the story of this card specifically in relative to you. And the key word is also relative. Generally, this is somebody that you know, and they know you. So they can say, oh, I see. Oh, first of all, what they do first is show you the past. So that way we can eliminate all doubt within the card, what the cards are saying, because that throws off the magnetism. So when the cards are first dealt, you can literally say, oh, okay, so you're married, you have 3 kids, you lost your job 2 weeks ago. It really reads out that deep for one who knows how to divine. So they do that first to set the vibration, okay? But again, when somebody can do this, and this led to much peril, when someone can do this, you really have to test the integrity of the person because they can have weak integrity. Let's say, for instance, they could be that jack corrupting into a knave. You see what I mean? And then thus they're all tainted and they're telling you your future. And then they're reading that and they're just, it's all messed up. You can see what I'm saying. And it will happen more often than not. Even in the mystic test book, the author, who is clearly initiate of a secret society, only uses the readings from himself that he's generating. And generally his deck is his own, just like they've still kind of kept that in the idea of tarot, that a lot of the tarot card readers, they got their own specific deck. You see what I mean? They don't just go buy a fresh new package and no, they got this deck and, you know, they get time and hands and all this stuff on this deck and it gives it more energy, more magnetism. Because really all that's really happening, if you want to break all this, pull all the flesh away and just break down the framework, is just that. The deck itself is the framework for the entire year. It corresponds to all the numbers in which are evoked in the matrix. And in that way, just like man and woman, for sure, they've been given a soul, meaning that there's an animus moving through it. And so this is where the notion came from, that this system, this code, it is alive because an animus is moving through it, because it is the date, the time, and everything else that we've talked about here so far. That gives it a certain level of life. And in that certain level of life, with adding one's sheer input, our magnetism in that way takes it the rest of the way. You see what I mean? And that's why it was used as a real divination system. Like you will find in the Epic of Hatcher-Hasis, the gods using some kind of divination system to determine who's going to stay down here versus who's going to go up there, because there's positions that need to be fulfilled. Now, I'm not telling you again that, hey, this is the story. I'm saying the stories are allegories, and they're explaining to you the importance of certain things. And this is why we see casting lots all the time inside the Old Testament to determine what's going to happen in big situations. But don't think that that's just a dreidel or something like that. This is a system of divination that is then practiced by someone who is in tune with the tribe in order to know what is this saying is going to happen in something that constantly repeats itself and has a pattern-like nature so precise that you can plant at certain times and get something, and then plant at that same thing at another time and get nothing. There's a precision here. And one who excels at the precision finds that everything does fall into place, because you actually are understanding how that would really happen in the first. You understand how that really happens. Like, why is stuff falling into place? And it's because you have cracked into the pattern. Now, I have a few final things here. The term is intergenerational hatred. Okay? Intergenerational hatred. Quite interesting term. This term actually refers to when, even at what it feels like birth, you, for some reason, dislike a person of another culture, race, species, whatever kind of separation you want to put there, okay? So much to a point where it becomes endemic. So this means that your kids come out, they possess this same hatred. And in many times, sometimes if we can pause history, we would try to figure out, hey, where is all this hatred coming from, right? Because the world is practicing a lot of hatred right now. Like now, I think the Christians and the Muslims are going to get into it again. Hey, what else is new, right? However, this consistent, because you don't follow or believe in what I believe in, I don't like you, always is generally a product of the belief system itself. So the belief system is teaching and creating this conflict, okay? And one thing that we need to zoom in on is the missing link in history of why there became a black-white conflict, which is still present in this world today. And this happens in part due to what went on in London, because this is the time that we're really covering here, 16th century, 17th century, when we find a few things have actually occurred. One, not only has Rome at a certain stage earlier, of course, reached its height, but Rome was literally in itself like what the modern United States and the Allies are like right now. Sometimes when we think of Rome, we think of like Carthage, and we just see that one area and maybe the Colosseum, and we think that was Rome. But Rome was like the Axis powers, ruling different areas and then maintaining a kingdom. This is why, or an empire, right? Because this is why you have emperor, right? Which is like Caesar, right? So you have these different roles. You got like an emperor up here, and then you got lower roles. And so one thing that I want to bring up is that it was known that in Rome, they enlisted soldiers generally from northern Africa, like the Berbers, etc., horsemen, marauders, these kind of really skilled warriors to guard or uphold Rome in certain territories, right? And these territories were all like the consecrated territories, like the Holy Lands in these places. Now, here's what you'll come to find out about history. The first thing is, when you want to tell yourself the truth, is that no race seems to be clear of when it's the end of their, dynasty or whatever, that you don't see some pretty ugly things. Okay, so this is something we find in all races, like in the end of the Khmer Rouge, in the end of the Nagas, in the end of in the end of Rome, in the end of Troy, in the end, it always looks pretty ugly. The end of Egypt, you see what I mean? So if we always base things on the end, we still have to know that, hey, that was the end. But we can't deny what was going on in the end. And in the end, we had a complete upheaval where, and you could just notice this from the dynasty of King James, even Charles and Ferdinand. And it just keeps going back further. It keeps going to Darius, Dulcarnain, or Alexander the Great. That there's this consistent thing that goes on with warriors, that they don't stay in power long. And here's why. A king is not determined in the not too distant past by how intelligent he is. That only plays a certain factor. Amongst giants, it will always be how strong you are. Okay, so let me just let you understand this. This is that whole draconian thing that we were talking about before, about how the reptilian in itself, or that genus, that part of the brain, is it tests metal. It's very alpha-like in that way. We got an alpha, i.e. the king, and everybody else follows the king. But you need to understand the king was always the strongest of us, physically, for thousands of years. So anybody challenging the king needed to physically beat the king. And this is why kings often waned, because they, as this young buck coming, he overthrows. But this was often your brother. Generally, your uncle may have encouraged it, but I'm just saying in the kingdom, often, and you see this, Tyrion, all the different emperors of that time under the Caesar, they're constantly going to war, right? And then 5 years later, but this is the same family, but he's like, oh, you didn't trust him, so you assassinated him, and now he's there. So don't think that you're going to go to this history book, and the true history, her story, as I call it, and find that there was this benevolent race, and then they got attacked by the bad people, and the bad people won. That is not the story. Everything is being tested under time, i.e. the mystical test book. It's a book, which I gave it to you, that's literally saying this is some kind of trial or test in itself. There's someone watching for sure, but it's not who you think it is religiously. It is something that intends to take you through these trials or experiences until you become whole, fully enamored. This means that you visited every star, mainly the ones that are important. This means that you oscillated through the zodiac as different characters, which, as I say, still have their foundation in animalistic traits, but you oscillated through these until you finally have reached apex. To now, you get the keys to the car. Now we're going to see what you're going to do with it, because it's just that stage of the test. So I have to go further with explaining then that, so there were many melanin-dominant men in the Roman Empire that played major roles. There's books about this, including King James, Charles, Ferdinand, even Charlemagne, which this is the heresy that I'm talking about in this world, including Jesus and the rest of these characters, especially when King James introduced them. were all melanated characters, because this is knowledge coming from the Naga, right? Eventually making it to the Moors, or the Arabs, as they call them today, right? Which, that's a knockoff, that's a hijack, but still, see how it passes? See, these numbers and these codes in themselves are like bestowing royalty for those who can comprehend them, because it gives them a chance to rule over themselves and their own destiny, just to see how they would do. See if they would succumb to their own knave-like behavior and page-like behavior, or if they would truly transcend the game before it falls down like a house of cards on them. So when we go to study further, as I mentioned before, I told you about even the Saxons saying in their in their book of history, this chapter begins, our forefathers, the darker ones, basically, which are, as I mentioned before, the Formorians. You see what I mean? So there's a consistent conflict going on in these territories that are generally related to wealth versus poverty. Okay, this is where this begins. Because not too long ago, you remember that, especially in the United Kingdom, that these territories were completely wastelands on themselves. People were throwing feces out into the streets. Even one of the kings is on record for saying that he only took bath 2 times a year. One was by force. That there were many people who had died just because of scabs and lice. That the butchers were throwing meat out into the streets after, and pouring the blood into the streets after killing the animals. The clothes, there weren't several pairs of clothes. There was only one. There was no bathhouses like the Arabs introduced later on during the Crusades and during these times. So you still have to remember that in these territories, it was extremely dank. And a lot of times people don't think about what was the spiritual environment. Because if I have feces smelling all over the place and I haven't taken a bath for a year, what kind of spirits do you think I'm going to have? Is it going to be like, oh, like, hey, no, that's astral hygiene. So also, this is not something we're making up. Even to this very day, when they shoot a movie about medieval times, they always show you people missing their teeth. That's another thing. Like, you know, we got most of the time like a set of pearly whites. They do last for a certain time, but hey, teeth, right? It looks weird when somebody opens their mouth and there's a few teeth missing, right? Hey, you know what I mean? It just does, you know, respect your elders, but I'm just saying. But imagine arriving someplace and everybody's teeth is black and missing. You see what I mean? So this is not the vibe. And this is why we got to just do common sense thinking. What changed the vibe of Europe? What brought in enlightenment? What brought in the bourgeoisie? Changing clothes. Like I was reading about, you know, this Arab man who came in and he introduced changing clothes even in different seasons and wearing other scents to counteract other scents and opening up bathhouses. And because there was laws that were passed even then that the barber surgeons believed if you bathed, you open yourself up to diseases that were all around. So thus it was forbidden to bathe. This is the history that everybody seems to forget and put all under the carpet, just like they're doing our ancestors and our elders all the time. It's easy to forget about them now that they're sitting in the pinnacle of society with hyper-intelligence in their hands, but forget the shoulders that are there like, yo, but what are you finding up there? Can you send that knowledge back to the children, my children that were here? What? Double-crossed. Because that's what you get, is you get double-crossed. Now, it doesn't have a specific face or race on it, but it's very clear to see that King James took the knowledge that was present in Ethiopia from the real Levites, because they got the knowledge from Solomon And his son Menelik, or MLK, which later on became Moloch. You see what I mean? So his knowledge. And then, as I said, so the society, it gets a complete makeover. And people are moved out of the dark ages. But as I said before then, it was really like a financial thing as it is in the world today. If you didn't have any money, which many Slavs didn't, then you would fall into the black territory of debt. Okay, and I'm gonna show you how this is why the hatred is so deep right now. Because there were so many, let's say, Polish, German. This was a consistent thing in Europe where these people were being enslaved at a certain stage towards the end of what you would say is the reign. And that is boiling down to King James II, and King James III, his son, never was able to take his place because he was disposed. And this is where Martinism comes in, Calvinism comes in, and there's this huge war and spiritual revival, Protestants, stuff that just like, yo, I remember that stuff in school, but what is it all about? Amish people? Manifest destiny? What is all this stuff about? And that's how learned people are. It's even about the stuff that we know. They don't put the dots together. King James started Jamestown. Now, think about in the American Gods, okay? There's a character that's like a leprechaun, okay? And this character actually links up with this black lady. And they start going through this role, and they start basically saying that, hey, there's some kind of connection between especially redheaded Irish people with freckles and black people. And that's what we talked about before about Scotia, where Scotland was named after, was a queen of one of the last Egyptian pharaohs and then went into Ireland, right? Where's the rest of that story? What happened there? I'm trying to explain to you what happened there. King James and his father's father instilled a new religion, if you may, which was a remake of the old religion, but it featured a black Madonna and her son, which Vladimir Putin just took out of a case, one of the oldest ones, to show everybody, hey, here's like the truth about the matter. But this is not to prop up black people, white people, or anybody. It's to show you how deep the truth is. Because then with all this new pomp and circumstance, which is Catholicism, that's why you still find a lot of black people that are like Catholics, right? And you think like Catholic's the right thing. And again, I'm just speaking from the level of ignorance here. Okay, it's like, yeah, Catholics, and now I'm Baptist, AME on mine. You know what I mean? We're speaking in tongues in here, and Catholic, they all, oh man, no, we got spirit here. You see what I mean? But see, what's happening is those people in Baptist and AME, et cetera, Pentecostal, they're raising serpents with hallelujah. You see what I mean? Which is what that word does. They're raising up spirits, speaking in tongues and divine oracles, and that's where all that comes from. But by the time it gets to Catholicism, which is where King James and all them were at, it's super bougie. Amen. And it's also used as a way to stay in power while keeping all of these other Serbs and people who are either in Germany, because Germany plays a big role in this. The Saxon tribes, the two Saxon tribes that were warring against each other, ended up even joining each other because of the oppression of King James. And then, again, understanding that Jamestown was set up with indentured servants. What is this? This is when, and this was what was also a story they replayed on American Gods, but look at the story, and it's all in history, that there were a lot of people that owed debt to the king and to the colonies. So the same kind of Serb like, hey, y'all owe us money now, that debt-based system was present then, even with the black kings. But it went under a religious context because this is where you get Jesuits from. This is where you get black popes from, quote unquote, is a secret society of men who stem from the cult of Amun, their fathers, right? Holding the secrets of language, since Egypt and before then, since the first stones were put on the earth, bin, this kind of stuff. The first stone to rise out of the water as the water settles, right? But still a whole world in the ocean. This is what it's like. People are oblivious to also that the reason why they were fighting Yam as the quote unquote, which means disturbed waters. And then also Tiamat, which also has to do with the waters, is because there's a whole kingdom in the waters that still resides in the waters. And because we need sweet water, we can't go over in there. We need oxygen, so we can't go over in there, even though many of our ancestors are from that space. This is what they don't want to talk about. The Holy Sea, the fish hats, the mermaids, the Sibyls in Troy, Brutus, as I mentioned before, and all of this other part of real history, not even more than 400, 500, 600 years old, right there telling us this is why they're not telling you the truth. Because they can't from where they sit, because they've lied about everything. The tradition, how it's supposed to be worshiped, this is all internal stuff. They've literally bought an external person, but you can see why. Of course, if I'm being oppressed, I'm going to flip the entire society to actually then try to put up a version of me so the world can start looking at me as if, and my people, as if we are higher than the ones that were doing that before. So who's right here? Nobody. But it continues. And you can read the story for yourself. I'll drop some books. But it goes on is that we end up in a huge clash. And it gets to being racial. And this is because most of the black people are holding the black nobility, meaning they're holding all of the money and all of the stuff. So even when you're seeing these forefathers running over to the U.S., what are they running into? They're running into a situation where King James has already sent and set up a colony in Jamestown. And many of the Indians already know either they already have deals with the Moors all the way back into Cordoba and Al-Andalus and all these. They have these trade routes and these deals already. Or they see them that they're about to come. Like, yo, they're moving it over here. You know, the world is not dumb like everybody thinks, where you got these indigenous people all out. They don't know anything. That's not how it was. There was a chain of communication going on everywhere. The Sibyls were predominantly responsible for that chain of communication. So they knew King James and Europe. Okay, let's rewind. On the gates in Europe, there's a unicorn and there's a lion. Everybody knows that unicorn is a hippopotamus because there's another crest that looks exactly like it, and it's got a hippopotamus. It would have been too much to put that one there. Hippopotamus and a lion. You do not find a hippopotamus or a lion in Britain, okay? Where is this heraldry coming from? And that's what I'm saying. Well, just go only a little bit further back, and you will find there's a whole legacy with Spain and all this going on and trade routes. But remember, so the founding fathers are running from King James and all of what's going on in Brittany or the Britanny. And they're coming to this new world. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to make agreements with other tribes. That's why they say, hey, there's some Indian tribes that they don't like black people. You know, there's rumors about that. It's true because when these colonies were moving in, they knew, oh man, they're coming over here to take over, but this is our land. So King James put the foothold of Jamestown that became one of the first to begin to start colonizing America, right? But when King James, they changed his color of his face, and his father, and they changed the color of his face. And then you see what I mean? That confuses everybody. Then we're over here trying to figure out which one is right from a racial level, which you'll just run into more ignorance and more stupidity as you try to basically make up for tyrants, like people who actually, like, you can see them today. Give Rick Ross the title of king and see what happens after a while, especially to all of the men first. He'll have all the pretty ladies in there, including your daughter. You see what I mean? Like, this is tyranny. And this is what we need to understand happens when you get these imbalances. Now, think about this. So to sell the U.S. as a country, it was to be against that, right? It was to start something new, right? But it did later on fold back into that again, because some say that was even the plan all along. But in that whole process, many of us got an opportunity to see something different. We got a chance to see ourselves united. And that's what I was saying. It's United Kingdom, United Arab Emirates, United States, all of the Uniteds were that moment where we can all see that, hey, you know, this aristocracy and all these people, they don't like us anyway. Unless we have money or skills, they don't want to deal with us. This is the same thing all the way back in Egypt, especially towards the end. Do you think Pharaoh is letting everybody in his house? Do you think a ruler that rules with an iron fist is user-friendly? See, we make up stuff in our minds sometimes, and it makes no sense. You can't rule an empire of brutes where your own brother is ready to slip the knife in you to take your position and your role, unless you're doing that through fear, which is the club, and through slavery, which is the spade. You see what I mean? And then you take all the craftsmen and you put the craftsmen close to you and let them build your fortresses, your weapons, and that's what happened. And you know what the last name is? Stewart. Right? You know the last name is Stewart, right? But it's not pronounced that way. It's pronounced sword. Sword. Okay? So the Stewart family, as they're calling them today, were the symbol themselves of the sword. And so anytime they needed to make sure somebody got and fell in line, they were calling knights on you, and they were black. They were marauders. So the whole empire towards the end was really in fear if you weren't bourgeoisie, if you weren't on the top. And those that were on the top got dethroned. The Germans rose up. A lot of the tribes in Europe, the Teutons, even black people, white people, it was like Indians, Spains. But in the end, though, it was basically a betrayal of families, okay? Because to try to figure out, like, you got people that are from Italy with darker skin than me, okay? So this wasn't trying to figure out, like, where the person was actually from. It was about their allegiance. And so when it starts splitting, you had times, and this is your real, like, depiction on the astral plane, at least, of Harry Potter style warfare. You had temples that were being overthrown, that were once in the hands of the old priestcraft, and now they were coming with something new, but more than anything, they were bringing death. They had to bring this overthrow by the sword. Many were exterminated, and many were betrayed, because there were always times where you could be just a family that was benefiting from the what they call the plantogenics. What is it? The plantogens. They have a kind of strange last name. I always kind of jabber it, but you could basically had something going on, and they would ask you, "Hey, are you aligned with them?" And you knew to say that you were aligned meant death. This is why you got this a lot in history. Remember, the Jews even pretended to be Christians because of this kind of same things. Like, hey, are you Jewish? No, maybe Jesus, praise the Lord. Shit. Damn, they're killing everybody. So there were people that weren't like, kill me. I'm Joan of Arc. You know what I mean? This is not the vibe. People are like, I don't have nothing to do with them. I'll go watch. When you kill him, he was always brutalizing us like, shit, hide those receipts. So this is kind of like the pinch of the game, okay? When new kings or new houses move in, you get this scramble of taking the knowledge and taking the key components and trying to stylize it as you know what I mean? And then, like, there's for sure Ethiopian Bible, and everybody in there looks Ethiopian, and there's a European Bible, and everybody in there looks European. You see what I mean? So you stylize the secrets, but do people lose the secrets when it becomes too much about the game and not about the code? How could one even begin to deprogram if they won't take a careful look at the language? Most people went headlong into being some kind of spiritual teacher, but taught in the very language in which that was causing the confusion without pointing out the errors within it. One shouldn't be in a rush all the time. Like, yo, I know. You should be more in a rush to sit and listen if one can get the truth. But this is not the society that we're living in. This is what I'm bringing up here. This is why we're always creating these environments, right? And we're sealing these environments and we're bringing these environments into the natural principle. And this is because, like I said, nobody really knows who you are until you do something that is not honorable, like lie and get caught in the lie, scheme and scam and get caught in the scheme and scam. Then millions of people are now focusing on you, right? But when you're doing what everyone says they want to be done, hey man, just, don't lie to us, don't deceive us, don't use us. You see what I mean? And you could do that for years and just remain in that position, right? That's the kind of world that we're living in. Don't deviate from that though. But I'm just saying, like, peep out what goes on around you. Understand the difference between deep knowledge. Like they give the symbolism. The hearts are the spring of love, okay? The trifoil clover leaf of summer is the knowledge gained and retained. That's what you see as the clubs, the trifoil leaf. This is the intelligence, heat, arguments, and legal. You see what I mean? These are all things that come about in the game. Like we would love for our life to have very little of it, but it's shuffled in the deck, right? We have the diamond. It's the third part of when the crops are sold. So the diamond in itself was a 3-part tool in that way. And it was a symbolism too that when we reach the third part of the year, we reach the height of the spring. And thus in that, or the height of the reaping of the crops. And so this was a signal to sell, right? And then in that time, you would gain your wealth. This is the fourth part, which was winter. As a spade, it meant as a spade, you didn't have a resurrection. You see what I mean? There was two different symbols here. You didn't have a resurrection as a spade. It needed to be an acorn, okay, which was the original spade. And the acorn was a symbol of death and burial because obviously this seed, like you would just think nothing's going on and it would just be there buried for who knows how long. And then all of a sudden it would start sprouting up into a tree. So these symbols had these meanings that when they're no longer like relevant anymore, people are moving kind of aimlessly through time, but time will continue. And guess what? It won't end because the 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7, it never ends, right? So they're looking for an end. Hey, he's going to come. Jesus is going to come. God's going to come. End of the world's going to come. But that was the same thing their parents were saying. They're not realizing, yeah, the end of the world's going to come for you. It's going to come for every single person individually. And what goes on at that point will be the test of what it is that you actually did in the reality. Did you sit behind just the wisdom itself or the knowledge itself or the spiritual books themselves and use that as a way to leverage yourself over everybody else, like King James, basically? Or like all knights that become knaves? Did you take the bribes? Did you compromise who you were as a character and switch into another one that you don't know how to play? You can't play by hand. You see what I mean? So all of this connection, you will see continuously unfold within what you've learned here today. It will be indistinguishable from the reality. So it's not something that somebody needs to prove. As I said before, the proof of wisdom is one in the type of people that it produces. And then, of course, in the end, what remains will be the truth. Now we will just wait for the test of time to take its toll on everything. As I say, time is going to take its toll on everything. So is it going to make you wiser? Or is it going to prove in fallacies? Fallacies, yes. Is it going to uncover things? Because that's what happens in all this. People sneak around, they do sneaky stuff, And then in time, the cover is gone. I have a joke. This joke is about, this joke is about, like, they say that they found these UFOs sitting in the water. And then when they found these UFOs, they had, you know, they were just there, and they unearthed them, and then they back engineered the technology within the UFO. And then they became, like, you know, that's how the new age was ushered in, right? So I tried to think about, did the aliens just forget to call a tow truck? Or were they like, yo, don't worry, we'll go back and get it. And then they were like, yo, don't worry about it. There's still dinosaurs over there, man. Don't worry about it. We'll get the shuttle. And then they just got absent-minded and left the shuttle for these. Now, I'm just saying that this is how crazy some of the stories have gotten about how we got to where we're at right now and who is actually involved. I'm telling you, look no further than the numbers. You can start first with the words, and then they will lead you to their master, which is the numbers. And that you take it slow, because numbers can indeed make you numb. But you realize that there are certain reoccurring forces that are magnetic in the reality. And when you embody those forces, which would just be to be yourself, then you roll through a complete system of perfection in this design. So I just wanted to say wholeness and balance vibration. I want to thank everybody that joined into the build today to lend the collective power and energy, and for sure luck that it takes to be able to get to this level of transmission. I can't say how many different things, quirks, and weird stuff that often attempts to deter one from the mission. However, I can also say in each of those that I always isolate that something else was being avoided. And in that way, none of it was actually working against me, but actually working towards me getting to a greater level of truth. Now I bring that truth to you. So for sure, I've sat in a place really by myself in retrospect to things, just studying, honing in the technique, the skill, and the awareness in which I need to sojourn the infinite journey. You see what I mean? Comfortably. The compass to Zion, as we talked about, the compassion, what really fuels you to give people knowledge, information, and go in deep, to go beyond what everybody believes. As I said before, yeah, for sure, if 6 billion people are doing something and I still prove it to be wrong, I will be that one person walking the other way. And if for whatever reason I'm in the wrong direction, I can still trust that the love that I put in and the compassion that I put into this world, into this message, that in that way I would receive some level of grace. But I'm telling you, it doesn't need any of that. It just needs you to wake up, pay attention, get rid of your divisions inside. It's the ones that are harmful for you, like the ones that are separating you from the truth, separating you from your legacy, separating you from your lineage, separating you from your elders. People shouldn't feel like because they're another race and another race had seeded them, all bad about it. In fact, like if you found out that your uncle, great uncle was a king, how does this hurt you? You see what I mean? So this is what I'm saying though, but still don't be surprised though if you keep reading and you find uncle did some pretty crazy stuff. You need to take that as a lesson, especially based on his demise, and then move on to something that's new and something that's greater, because that's what we're here to do. We're here to bring the newness, i.e. the sun, the light, the enlightenment. We're here to bring that to the entire reality. But what are you enlightening them on? How to bake cookies? Like there can be, but only a small amount of knowledge here that is truly valuable. A little book that sets everything straight and makes the path clear. So that way you can stay on your journey and not have to worry about the turbulence and the turmoil of being off the path. So that's all I'm going to say about it right now. I'm going to go ahead and open it up. As you know, we got one more Tribe Vibes this year, so I had to definitely taper it. I've definitely seen if I can move in at some point. I may, I think YouTube needs at least the last video in this one. I'm sure everybody here will agree. Like, yeah, I'm loving to keep it here, but we know that we need to kind of compile this in a certain way and let everybody else eat before December, right? Before the new year and all that. So that way they come into this 2025 and they're solid. Because all we're talking about here is once we can get more sovereigns, because this goes deeper, and that's why we need to set this foreground, because remember, this is tied into the sailors. This is tied into the original sovereigns. This is tied into the ones that made the journey and survived the journey. And these are the ancestors. So there's more to this, but there's also the foundation that is necessary for us to be able to stand in it, to no matter what we hear, not try to bend the truth to fit some kind of narrative that somebody told us 100 years ago or something like this that doesn't match up with the layers of truth, especially when we know there's been alterations to the truth. We need to be able to see ourselves now. The way we feel about each other, white, black, brown, Indian, is determining where you're really at in this. If you haven't figured out how to clear energy, but I can remember going through it though. That's why I bring it up now. I can remember, like, you know, even when I was younger, I was raised in an Islamic community, right? So when you come through these movements, they embed stuff on you. You're like, yes, that's how it is, right? But you got to get to a level at some point where amongst all the chaos, you're going to need to set your own foundation and get stable. And you can only do that with the truth.
Advanced spiritual intelligence is on the rise. Like and subscribe to continue this legend and share to support the mission.